The night I walked into the wrong funeral. I had no idea I was walking into the rest of my life. I was supposed to be in Greensboro. I had the address saved in my phone, a sympathy card in my purse, and a tank of gas. What I did not have was the right church. I figured that out when I saw the name on the program. They handed me at the door. I did not know that name. I had never heard it in my life. But by the time I realized I was in the wrong place, the organ was already playing and every seat was full, and a man in the front row had his head bowed, so low it looked like the weight of it might break him in half. So I stayed. I slid into the back pew and I stayed. That was the night everything changed. Welcome to our channel, where we bring you emotional stories that stay with you. If you're new here, hit subscribe and the notification bell so you never miss a story. And if you're returning, thank you. Your support means everything. Now, stay until the end, drop a comment with your thoughts, and let's begin. I almost did not go at all. That whole week, I had been going back and forth with myself about it. My college roommate Kezia had called me on a Sunday evening, voice thick, asking if I could make it to her grandmother's homegoing service that Saturday in Greensboro. I had lesson plans due. I had a stack of art projects to grade. I had not taken a real road trip alone since my mother passed 3 years before, and something about long drives still made my chest feel strange and hollow in a way I could not fully explain. But Kezia had driven 8 hours to sit with me at my mother's funeral, without me even having to ask. She had shown up with food, with her presence, with her quiet. The least I could do was drive 4 hours to Greensboro. I left Charlotte at 7 in the morning. I had my coffee in the cup holder, my playlist going, Bryson Tiller low in the background. The drive was fine. The weather was fine. Everything was fine until I got off the highway, and my GPS took me through a series of turns that felt wrong and kept feeling wrong until I pulled up in front of a red brick church on a narrow street that did not match the address Kezia had sent me. I checked my phone. The address was right. The church name was different. I figured it was just called something different than what Kezia had in her contacts. Old churches rename themselves sometimes. I had been to 3 churches in my own neighborhood that had gone through name changes in the last decade alone. So I parked, grabbed my purse and card, and walked up the steps. The woman at the door handed me a program before I could even look at it. Someone inside was already at the mic doing a welcome. The organ underneath her voice was full and warm, and the kind of sound that gets into your ribs before you even sit down. I looked at the program in my hand. Celebrating the life of Margaret Elaine Monroe, beloved mother, faithful servant, woman of God. I did not know a Margaret Monroe. I stood there for a second in the back of that church, card in my hand, the organ filling every corner of the room, and I did a full, slow look around trying to find Kezia's face. I did not find it. What I found instead was a packed sanctuary, at least 300 people, hats and suits and tissues, and in the very front pew, a man sitting alone with his shoulders curved forward and his head down. Something about him made me stop looking for the exit. I do not know how to explain that. I am a practical person. I teach 14-year-olds how to find meaning in color and shape. I grade papers on the weekend. I meal prep on Sundays. I am not the kind of woman who reads into things. But something about the way that man was sitting, the particular weight of it, the specific way grief was sitting on him, made my feet stay where they were. I checked my phone one more time. Kezia's church was 4 streets over. I had turned too early. The welcome was finishing. People were settling. An usher was already moving toward me with that gentle hand gesture that means sit down or step out, and I was blocking the back door. I sat down. I told myself I would slip out after the first song. Then the choir started, and I told myself after the remarks. Then an elderly woman stood up at the mic and started talking about Margaret Monroe in a way that made half the room reach for their tissues at the same time, and I forgot I was supposed to leave. She talked about a woman who raised her son alone after his father walked out when the boy was 4 years old. She talked about a woman who worked doubles at a hospital laundry for 11 years, so that boy could go to school with a better math program. She talked about a woman who never once let her son see her cry about money, who made every Friday night feel like a celebration with a pot of oxtails and a card game and whatever gospel record she had playing in the kitchen. The man in the front pew did not move through any of it. He sat completely still. When they carried the casket out and the family file behind it, I finally saw his face. He was tall. That was the first thing. Even bent slightly with grief, he was tall, broad to the shoulders, wearing a black suit that fit him the way good suits fit men who are not thinking about their suit at all. His face was a kind of face that, under different circumstances, you would call handsome without hesitation. Hazel eyes, which surprised me, strong jaw, and an expression that was not crying, but was something quieter and harder than crying. The kind of face that has already used up all its tears somewhere private, and is now just carrying the empty. He walked past the back pew where I was sitting, and I looked down at my program, so he would not catch me staring. I meant to leave after the recessional. I did not leave. There was a repast in the fellowship hall downstairs, and somehow I ended up in the flow of people moving toward it, and before I made a conscious decision, I was downstairs holding a paper plate with mac and cheese and a square of cornbread, and standing near the food table feeling like the most ridiculous person in the room. I had crashed a funeral. Not on purpose, but still. I was eating a dead woman's repast food, and I did not know a single person in that room. I took a bite of the mac and cheese, and immediately felt guilty about how good it was. "You good?" I looked up. He was standing beside me. Not close enough to be intrusive. Just beside me. The way someone stands when they have nowhere specific to be and no energy left to perform having somewhere to be. He had a plate too. Sweet potato pie, and what looked like a small piece of cornbread. Up close his eyes were more green than I expected. Still hazel, but with more green in them, and red around the edges from a grief he had been holding for what looked like days. "I'm so sorry for your loss," I said, because that was the right thing to say, and also because I meant in a way I had not expected to mean anything today. He nodded once. "Thank you." He looked at my plate. "The mac and cheese any good?" "It's really good," I said, and then immediately felt strange saying that. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. My Aunt Roberta made it. She's been making it the same way for 40 years. My mother used to say Roberta over-salted everything, but the mac and cheese, she got exactly right. I did not know what to say to that, so I just said, "She did." He looked at me then, not the polite glance of a man doing social maintenance. An actual look, the kind where someone is really trying to figure out who they are talking to. "I don't think we've met," he said. My stomach dropped to the floor. "No," I said, "we haven't." I put my plate down on the table beside me and turned to face him properly, because if I was going to confess this, I was going to do it standing up straight. "My name is Naomi Calloway. I am so sorry. I got the address wrong. I was supposed to be at a service 4 streets over from my college roommate's grandmother, and I walked in here by mistake. And I know how that sounds, but the organ was already playing, and I didn't want to be rude, and then I stopped. I stayed." He looked at me for a long moment. "You stayed," he repeated. "I can go," I said. "I should go. I'm so sorry. I ate your aunt's mac and cheese, and I don't even." "My name is Elijah," he said. "Elijah Monroe." He picked up his plate again. And my mother would have loved this story. I blinked. "She collected people," he said. He was looking at the food table now, not at me, like he was talking more to himself than to anyone. Random people. Strangers. She was always bringing somebody home, somebody she met at the bus stop or at the grocery store. She would have found this very funny. He paused. She had a good laugh. My throat tightened in a way I recognized. "My mother was like that, too," I said quietly. He looked at me again. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Around us, the fellowship hall was full of noise and movement and the specific warm chaos of a black church repast, Annie stacking plates, children running between legs, somebody laughing too loud near the sweet tea, a deacon arguing softly with another deacon about something in the corner. But right where we were standing, it felt strangely still. "When did you lose her?" he asked. 3 years ago. I said, "November." He nodded slowly. I'm sorry about your mother," I said. "The woman who spoke about her. The things she said." "Miss Odessa," he said. "She's known my mother since before I was born." He looked down at his plate. Everything she said was true. I believed him. I did not know why, but I believed him completely. We stood there by that food table for a while. People came and went around us. Someone refilled the mac and cheese pan. A little girl in a white dress ran past us twice, and on the third pass Elijah reached out, without looking, and steadied her gently by the shoulder before she could collide with the table. And she looked up at him, and then ran off again, and he went back to his plate like it had not happened. I noticed that. I notice small things. It is what makes me a decent art teacher, and probably what makes me a difficult person to date. I pay attention to the way people move through space when they think nobody is watching. Elijah Monroe moved through that fellowship hall like a man who had been taught to take up exactly as much space as he needed and not 1 inch more. He spoke to everyone who approached him. He hugged the older women. He shook hands with the men. He crouched down to the level of the children. And every single time he came back to stand near the food table, near me, like it was the place he had decided to be. At some point, I got a slice of the sweet potato pie, and it was extraordinary, and I made a small involuntary sound, and he looked at me sideways. "Right?" he said. "Who made this one?" I asked. "My mother," he said. I stopped chewing. "She made it 2 weeks ago," he said. Froze it. She knew she wasn't going to make it to see Christmas. She made 4 pies and froze them, and left a note on each one about who they were for. He looked at his own slice. This one had my name on it. I sat with that for a moment. A woman who knew she was dying, and spent some of her last good days making sure her son would have her sweet potato pie at her funeral repast. She sounded like she was remarkable. I said, "She was the strongest person I ever knew," he said, "and she was 4'11". I laughed. It came out before I could catch it, and then I covered my mouth and looked at him with wide eyes because we were at a funeral and I had just laughed out loud. But he was smiling, a real one, small, tired, with grief still sitting all around the edges of it, but real. She would have liked that reaction, he said. We ended up outside on the church steps when the fellowship hall got too warm. The November air was cold and clean, and the street was quiet. Someone had left a paper cup of sweet tea on the step beside the railing, and neither of us moved it. We sat on the top step with our coats on, and we talked. He asked me what I did, and I told him I taught high school art in Charlotte, and his face did something genuine and interested that people's faces do not always do when you tell them you are a teacher. "What do you teach them?" he said. "Like, actually teach them." "To look," I said. "Most kids go through their whole day and don't actually look at anything. I try to slow them down enough to really see what's in front of them." He was quiet for a second. "That's a real thing to do with your life." I did not ask him what he did. I do not know why. Normally I ask. It felt like the wrong question for that step on that night. It was almost 9 o'clock when I finally stood up and said I needed to drive back to Charlotte before it got too late. He stood too. He was even taller standing, and the church light behind us made everything feel amber and specific the way good November nights sometimes do. "Thank you for staying," he said. "I'm sorry I intruded." I said. "You didn't," he said. "You really didn't." I walked down the steps and got in my car, and I did not look back, but my hands were not quite steady on the steering wheel for the first 20 minutes on the highway, and I told myself it was just a cold. If you're feeling this story, hype it so others can find it. Comment where you're watching from. Now back to the story. I did not tell Kezia what happened for 2 weeks. When I got back to Charlotte that night, I texted her that I was sorry I missed the service, that I had gotten turned around, that I hoped everything went okay. She replied with a string of heart emojis and said her grandmother went peacefully and the choir sang beautifully and she was just glad I had tried to come. I said, of course. I put my phone face down on my nightstand and stared at my ceiling for a long time. I kept thinking about sweet potato pie made by a woman who knew she was leaving. I kept thinking about hazel eyes red around the edges from private crying. I went to school Monday morning and taught 4 classes, and came home and graded papers and made myself a plate of leftovers and sat at my kitchen table and did not think about Elijah Monroe. I did that for about 11 days before I admitted to myself that not thinking about him was actually all I was doing. The 12th day, Kezia called. "Tell me what actually happened," she said. She knew me well enough to know something had. So I told her. The wrong church. The program in my hand. The choir. Staying because of a man whose grief was so heavy it bent him forward in the front pew. the mac and cheese, the sweet potato pie with his name on it, the church steps. 9 o'clock at night in the November cold, talking to a stranger about what it means to really look at something. Kezia was quiet the whole time I talked. When I finished, she said, "Naomi." "I know," I said. "You don't even know his last name." "Monroe," I said. "Elijah Monroe." She was quiet again. Then, "Girl, Elijah Monroe." "What?" "Naomi, Elijah Monroe is the founder of Monroe Development Group. He builds mixed-use properties across the Southeast. He was in Charlotte Business Journal like 2 months ago. He is worth—" "Kezia." "A lot," she said. "He is worth a lot." I sat with that for a second. Then I said, "He ate sweet potato pie on church steps with me for 2 hours." "I know," she said. "That's the part that has me." I did not look him up. I want to be clear about that. I thought about it once, and then I closed the browser tab before anything loaded because it felt like cheating somehow. Like reading the last page of a book you are supposed to be living. What I did, instead, was go back to my life. I went to school. I coached my after-school art club on Thursdays. I called my grandmother in Savannah every Sunday. I went to church with my neighbor, Miss Pillay, who had been asking me to come with her for 2 years. And I finally went because November had me in a particular kind of feeling. And the choir was good enough to make me close my eyes. 3 weeks after the funeral, my phone buzzed with a number I did not recognize. The text said, "I found out the name of the woman who made the mac and cheese at my mother's repast." It was not my Aunt Roberta. It was a woman from the church named Sister Gloria, and she makes it with cream cheese. My Aunt Roberta has been taking credit for Sister Gloria's mac and cheese for 15 years. I read it twice. Then I type back, "Does your Aunt Roberta know that you know?" He replied in under a minute, "Nobody in this family is brave enough to tell her." I laughed out loud in my kitchen, alone, at 9:30 on a Tuesday night. We texted for 2 hours at night about nothing important, about mac and cheese and family politics, and the specific way older relatives claim ownership over dishes they did not make. At some point it shifted, and we were talking about our mothers again. The way grief conversations have a way of finding their way back to the center of the thing, no matter where they start. He told me his mother used to sing in the kitchen every Saturday morning. Old Shirley Caesar records, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I told him my mother kept a jar of peppermint candy on her nightstand her whole life, and the smell of peppermint still stopped me in my tracks in the middle of grocery stores sometimes. He said, "I know exactly what you mean. There's a specific smell of hospital laundry detergent. I can't explain why I find it comforting, but I do." I understood that completely, and I told him so. Before we stopped texting that night, he asked if he could call me sometime. I said yes. He called the next evening on his drive back from a site visit in Columbia, South Carolina, and we talked for an hour and 40 minutes, and I had to sit in my driveway after I got home from the gym because I had not wanted to lose the signal going inside. That was how it started. Not at a gala, not at a rooftop bar, in text messages about mac and cheese and Shirley Caesar records, in phone calls on highway drives, in the specific language of 2 people who had both lost their mothers and were still figuring out how to carry that. He came to Charlotte the first weekend of December. He did not make a production of it. He texted me on a Thursday and said he had a site visit near Uptown Saturday morning and asked if I want to get breakfast after. I said yes and immediately called Kezia, who talked me through my entire closet by video call on Friday night. I wore a rust-colored sweater and dark jeans and my good boots. I met him at a breakfast spot near the Green near 11 o'clock. He was already there when I arrived, standing outside with his hands in his coat pockets, and when he saw me, his whole face changed in a way that he did not try to cover. Something went loose and warm in my chest. We ate shrimp and grits and talked for 3 hours. The restaurant filled up and emptied around us twice. At some point, the waiter stopped coming by, and we did not notice. He told me about growing up in Charlotte, in the West Side, in a small apartment with his mother, who made every Friday a celebration with oxtails and a card game regardless of how the week had gone. He told me about the first piece of land he ever bought, a lot in West Charlotte, and how the day he closed on it, he drove to his mother's apartment and sat in the parking lot because he needed her to be the first person who knew. I told him about the year after my mother died, when I could not make myself paint anything. How I had gone the whole year, just teaching other people to make things while I myself made nothing. How one of my students, a 16-year-old girl named Destiny, had left a brand new set of brushes on my desk one afternoon with a sticky note that said, "Miss Calloway, you should make something." How I had cried in my supply closet for 10 minutes and then gone home and painted until 2 in the morning. "What did you paint?" he asked. "My mother's hands," I said, from memory. He was quiet for a moment. "Do you still have it?" "It's in my living room," I said. He nodded like that was exactly the right place for it. We walked after breakfast. It was cold and bright, that specific December cold that makes everything look sharp and clean. We walked around the green and talked, and at some point we were walking close enough that our arms were touching, and neither of us moved away. He pointed out a building across the street that he said he had been watching for 2 years, waiting for the right moment. What makes a moment right? I asked. He looked at the building for a second. Then he looked at me. "You just know," he said. "Some things you can analyze and plan and model out, and some things you just know." I looked back at the building so he would not see my face. He drove me back to my car, and when we got there we stood on the sidewalk in the cold, and neither of us said anything for a moment, and I could feel my heart doing something embarrassing in my chest. "I'm glad you went to the wrong church," he said. "I'm glad I stayed," I said. He looked at me with those hazel eyes and that quiet face, and I thought for 1 second that he was going to say something else. But he just nodded once and said he would call me tonight. And I said, "Okay," and I got in my car. I sat there for a minute with the heat running. Then I drove home. December moved fast the way December always does when you have something to look forward to. We talked every day. Not always long. Sometimes just a voice note while he was between meetings. Sometimes a late call after I finished grading. Sometimes just a text about something small. He sent me a photo one morning of a sunrise from a job site in Greenville, and the caption was just, "Made me think of your painting." I looked at that text for a long time before I responded. He came back to Charlotte the weekend before Christmas. This time there was no pretense of a site visit. He took me to dinner at a restaurant in South End that was quiet and warm, and had candles on the tables and a playlist that moved from her to P.J. Morton to Anthony Hamilton in a way that felt like somebody who thought about music the way I thought about color. We ate and talked and laughed, and at some point the conversation went somewhere deep and real the way it had on the church steps, that same quality of stillness, just the two of us in the middle of everything. He told me about his company, what he was actually building toward. Not the dollar amounts, the purpose underneath them. He wanted to develop land in neighborhoods like the one he grew up in, create something that gave those communities what they deserved without displacing the people already there. He talked about it with a quiet intensity that made me put my fork down and just listen. "Your mother's fingerprints are all over that," I said. He looked at me. "Yeah," he said, "they are." Walking back to his car after dinner, he reached over and took my hand. No announcement, no pause, just his hand finding mine like it was a natural and obvious thing. I kept walking. My heart was making noise again. The Charlotte night was cold and clear, and the city was doing that particular December sparkle it does when the lights are up everywhere. We stopped at my car, and he turned to face me. "Naomi," he said. "Elijah." I said back, and something about the way I said it made him smile. He leaned in and kissed me softly, briefly, and then pulled back and looked at me like he was checking something. I looked back at him. He kissed me again, slower this time, and the cold around us and city lights and the P.J. Morton still in my head all became part of the same feeling. When we stepped back, he kept my hand. "Merry Christmas," he said quietly. "It's still 5 days away," I said. "I know," he said. "I just wanted to say it." I drove home with the heat too high and the music off, and a feeling in my chest that I did not have the right word for yet. Christmas Eve, I was at my grandmother's house in Savannah with my aunties and my cousins, and particular warmth and noise of a full house, collard greens on the stove and cornbread in the oven, and a card game at the kitchen table that had been going since 3 in the afternoon. My grandmother's house smelled like peppermint. It always did. She kept the same candy my mother used to keep, same jar, same spot on the counter, and every time I walked through that door the smell hit me somewhere deep. I slipped out to the back porch for some quiet and called Elijah. He answered on the second ring. He was in Charlotte. It was the first Christmas without his mother, and he was quiet in a way that told me he had been sitting with that all day. We talked for a long time, about our mothers at Christmas, about the specific weight of first holidays, without someone, about candied yams, and what makes a house feel like a home. My cousin Brianna opened the back door twice to tell me dinner was ready, and I held up one finger, and she shook her head and went back inside. Before we hung up, he said, "I wish you were here." I held the phone for a second. The Savannah night was cold, and the stars were clear, and through the door I could hear my grandmother laughing at something one of my uncles said. "I'll be back in Charlotte Sunday." I said, "I know," he said. On New Year's Eve, he took me back to the church. Not for a service. He had talked to the pastor and gotten permission, and he brought a blanket and 2 cups of coffee. And we sat on those same church steps where we had sat in November and watched midnight coming from the parking lot with the stars above the tree lean and the distant sound of Charlotte ringing in the new year. "This is where it started," he said. "The steps," I said. "You," he said. "All of it. You." I looked at him. He looked back at me, steady, like a man who had thought about what he was about to say and decided it was true. "I knew," he said quietly. "That night, I didn't know your name or where you came from or how you ended up in the back of that church. But something in me just—" He paused. "Knew." The city was somewhere behind us making noise. The night was cold. The coffee was warm in my hands. "I knew you were mine from the first night," he said. I sat with those words. I let them land. The thing about grief is that it teaches you not to waste time arguing with what is real. My mother taught me that. His mother taught him. We had both been to enough funerals to know that the moments that matter are the ones you choose to stay for. I had stayed. By accident. Then on purpose. Then because there was nowhere else I wanted to be. I leaned into him and he put his arm around me, and we sat on those steps while the new year arrived. 2 people who had found each other in the wrong place at exactly the right time. What would you rate this story? Drop 0 to 10 in the comments right now. If this story moved you, hit subscribe for more emotional journeys every day. And if it truly touched your heart, consider leaving a super thanks. Your support helps us create more stories like this. Every contribution, big or small, means the world. Ready for the next story? It's even more dramatic than this one. Click now. Thank you for being part of this journey.